Good evening and welcome to On the Line. Tonight we have Mike Napier, who will be talking to us about
Oh,
precision warfare in Iraq 2003. Iraq 2003. But as always, we must give out a shout out to our funders, the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust, for supporting us in this our series on the Line. Mike, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
well, thanks for having me, Steve.
It's a pleasure. I should say to everybody, if you've got a question for Mike, please put it in the Q&A at the box at the bottom of your screen, and we will endeavour to get through as many of those as possible. Mike, you served in the RAF. Tell us a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, well, at the age of about 5, I decided that I wanted to be an RAF pilot when I grew up. And my mother pointed out you can't do both of those things. So I ended up joining the RAF as in the days when you could be a university cadet, you got paid to go to university. So I went through that, and then went through flying training, and ended up being posted to fly Tornadoes out in Germany at Bruggen in Germany in the mid 80s. So I did a couple of tours there. That was Cold War stuff, all charging around at low level and scaring the horses and all that kind of stuff, which is great fun. And then a little break when I went off and instructed down at Chivner at the Tactical Weapons Unit. I was an instructor on the Hawk and tactics instructor, and then back to the Tornado in 1992. And there I discovered that everything had changed that I ever knew, and from days of low level flying around Germany, it became days of medium level flying around and a little bit of time out in Iraq. That was in after the Gulf War, which had happened while I'd been instructing at Chivner. But we got to fly in the no-flying zone there, and I got to drop some bombs. We had a couple of, and we'll talk a bit when we start talking about Iraq about how the war sort of carried on as far as the Air Force was concerned. So that was 93. And then I became a staff officer for a couple of years, and then I left and became an airline pilot. So although I'm talking about the Iraq War 2003, I wasn't actually there. I was very safely tucked up in five-star hotels and things by that stage of it. But that's basically was 19 years worth of my Air Force career, all in the last century. But good fun while it lasted.
Wow, that was quick. It must be fun flying
It was.
tornadoes, though, at
It
low
was.
altitude.
It was fantastic. Yeah, it was. It was. Yeah, it was very. It was thrilling. It was exhilarating, exciting. All those good things. I mean, it was very hard work, and actually, it was particularly in the days of the Cold War. It was actually quite dangerous as well. Quite a few of my buddies didn't come back from flying accidents and things at low level. So it wasn't all fun and games, but yeah, as a way of of earning a living and doing something that we all felt was very, very worthwhile. In terms of being there at the front line of the Cold War, deterring the other side from coming in. Yeah, it was great.
And that would have been 30 plus years ago, and we kind of find ourselves very much back in that situation, I think.
We do, yeah. They say that yes, the pendulum's gone full circle, as they say.
Indeed, it has. But we're not here to talk
We're,
about that
we're
tonight.
not.
So, precision weapons.
Yeah.
Can you give me a potted history of precision weapons?
Yeah.
We get
So
to
let's start by unprecision weapons. So if you're going to drop a bomb, well, if you drop it from, let's say, 150 feet, like we used to do in the Tornado at low level, it's going to fall for about, I don't know, somewhere between 3 and 5 seconds. So it's going to go pretty much where you point it. However, if you then drop it from, or instead from up at 20 odd thousand feet, it's now going to fly through the air as it drops for about 25 or 30 seconds. And in that time, everything changes. Its speed is changing as it falls down. Any wind or anything is going to change in terms of both direction and speed. And of course, the temperature and the pressure of the air is all changing, and all that changes the aerodynamic forces on the bomb as it falls. So basically, if you drop a bomb from 20,000 feet onto a target, you're pretty much guaranteed to miss it. So the answer is either drop lots of them or drop some massive ones, so it doesn't matter whether you hit or miss, which is basically what the RAF went for at the end of World War II. The problem, again, if you're going to drop lots of them, you might get lucky, but if you're going to hit a target like a bridge, which is very, very sort of slender when you look at it from 20 or 1,000 feet, you've got to hit it very precisely. And of course, it's a very, very strong structure, but it has to be to hold up the roadway or the railway, whatever it is. So you're talking about a very slender target that's very, very, very tough. So you're going to have to hit it exactly. So the only way really you can guarantee to do that is a guided weapon, which the Americans realized in the back end about 1944. They they had a thing called raison, and that it stood for range and azimuth only, which basically you drop the thing and then it had a flare at the back of it, which the bomb aimer could see, and then he would use a little radio control to move it left or right a little bit. I mean, it didn't have a massive amount, clearly as it's free falling, or up and down a little bit. So you had a bit of a bit of leeway to steer it, and that was actually relatively successful. And they brought those out again in Korea when they're having problems dropping the bridges there, and again it was quite good. But it was very, very labour intensive. You had to have the guy there watching the bomb fall all the time and actually controlling it all the way, and it wasn't really that reliable. But then moved on to putting a TV camera in the front of the bomb. Again, made it a little bit easier to control, but not a lot more accurate really. And the breakthrough really came in the sort of late 1960s, early 1970s with laser guidance. And there you have the bomb. It's got a laser guidance or laser seeker on the front, and the back end it's got sort of wings, so it'll fly a bit, but the wings, with controls as well, so it can move up and down and left and right. And provided it's got a laser beam to follow down it goes, and it hits whatever you aim it at. And again, the Americans discovered that. Again, looking at bridges, famously the Tan Hoa Bridge that they've been trying to drop for years and years in Vietnam, they managed to drop with a sort of single mission. Went off with a few of these things and took it down. So that's how effective it was. But it was always a kind of minority weapon, or a special use weapon, shall we say, because we're concentrating on the war in Europe during the Cold War, and that was basically going to be fought at low level. And as already said, if a bomb's going to drop for 3 or 5 seconds, you haven't got time for it to follow a laser or anything. So really the laser guided bombs were for sort of specific targets like bridges. If you happen to be flying around at low level, so it wasn't something that the RAF looked into particularly. And again, the Americans, they had the capability, but didn't have a great opportunity or didn't see a great opportunity to use it. And then along came Gulf War One, and that was it kicked off in the traditional way with unguided weapons, but as the target sort of went down and became more specific, funny old thing, we end up with bridges, the bridges across the Euphrates and the bridges across the Tigris, which needed to be taken out. The only way you could do that is with laser bombs, as we said. And so then the switch went both for the RAF and for the USAF, and I guess the US Navy as well, to use laser-guided weapons to do that. And also against airfields, they're really good at hardened aircraft shelters, so you could take those out. You could take airfields out by actually very accurately dropping a bomb onto the taxiways so that people couldn't actually use the taxiways anymore to get onto the runways. So that was a great use of, or a great opportunity to use laser-guided weapons. And at the end of that war, about 8% of the weapons that were dropped during the Gulf War of 1991 were laser-guided, precision-guided weapons. So that had worked, and it worked well because also the weather was actually pretty good during that campaign. And the thing about laser weapons is that they're clear air mass weapons, which is another reason why it didn't work quite, or wouldn't have worked quite so well in Central Europe. And so you've got clear air mass over the desert, so you can fire a laser beam, it's going to go all the way. There's no clouds in the way to stop it, and so laser-guided bombs are going to work great. And that carried on sort of through Iraq, the no-fly zone, over the next sort of 7 or 8 years. And then there's the Kosovo kicked off. And again, that was where laser-guided bombs were going to be used because having learnt the lessons of the Gulf War and used them again over in the no-fly zone in Iraq, fantastic, let's use laser-guided bombs. The only problem with that, of course, is that Kosovo, being European, doesn't have quite the same clear air mass, and there was quite a lot of cloud, smoke, and all the rest of it, and so they didn't work quite as well. In fact, they were actually not particularly good at all. But actually that led to a design because the lesson that was learned was there needed to be some kind of backup. So the next step is that we now have a laser guided bomb, but it also has a backup on it with GPS. So you can type in the coordinates of the target, you can drop it, and down it goes, and it's going to be pretty accurate. But then you can use the laser as a sort of means to actually really refine that aim. So that's by the time we now get into 2003, we're looking into the Iraq War, and now we've got weapons which actually are going to be very, very accurate, where we're using both GPS and laser to make sure they go exactly where you want them to go.
So,
And
just a quick
okay,
question on
we
that.
stop
When
there.
when
Yes,
before before it gets to that point, is
yeah.
the delivering? So, does it require air superiority, and how vulnerable is the aircraft dropping these types of
That
weapons
is a
back
very good,
then?
yeah, very, very good point, actually. Yes, basically, we are talking about dropping them from medium level, so up to around 15, 20, 25,000 feet, that sort of level. Um, and if you're going to fly around at that level, yes, they're suddenly you're right in the envelope for fighter aircraft. And for surface-to-air missiles. I mean, that's why in Europe in the Cold War we concentrated on going at low level because you're kind of beneath beneath all the radar envelopes for surface um, weapons and hopefully in the ground clutter for fighter aircraft. But yes, so once you're up there, suddenly you're vulnerable to all that. So you need to have established some kind of air superiority, air supremacy. In the case, well, in Kosovo, there was no particular air-to-air threat. There was quite a lot of surface-to-air threat, but again, that was taken out by yeah, specific wild weasels, people who are going to go take out the suppression of air defences aircraft and systems. And during the Iraq War, similarly, there's no air-to-air threat, but there was quite a lot of suppression of air defence, seed support for packages going through. So, and obviously aircraft have their own defences against missiles as well. So yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's if you're going to drop them from medium level in that way, you do need to have some degree of superiority or supremacy in the air in that area. So yeah, that's absolutely right, Steve.
So,
Um,
I recall, I think that there was an expectation that Iraq's air defense were quite sophisticated at the time. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, no, it was
That was the
very
anticipation,
sophisticated.
anyway.
Yeah, it was. In terms of the fighter threat, it wasn't that sophisticated in that they didn't have that many aircraft because going back to the no-fly zones, which I mentioned, basically pretty much anything south of just to the south of Baghdad and below, there were coalition aircraft flying and stopping any other aircraft flying. And in the northern part as well, basically it was the 33rd parallel and 36th parallel, north of that and south of the other. So they were constrained really just to the middle of the country. So there wasn't a lot of scope for flying or flying training. So that although there were a couple of squadrons of aircraft which could have perhaps taken part, they had very few spares. They had very few pilots, and I think that's probably a wise move on their part to turn around and say, actually, we're not going to bother trying. But the actual air defense setup was very sophisticated. A lot of it had been taken down during the Gulf War, but they rebuilt it. And what they think the lesson that they learned was that if they were using microwave transmissions to link things together, that could be jammed or taken out. So instead, they went for fiber optics, buried fiber optics. And I think the Chinese were very heavily involved in sorting all that out for them. So more radars, and they made everything very mobile. They had this secure fiber optic communication system and missile systems. For example, around Baghdad, they had a ring of positions where pre-positions for SAM-3, which is it's actually a static missile thing, but they made it mobile. And what they do is they drive into a site, set the missiles up, leave them there for a day, and then move them somewhere else.
Mm.
And there are more sites than missiles, so you can never tell where they were going to be. So and also they would transmit from different radars. So they'd use one radar and then shut it down, then open another one up. So again, they were moving around. They looked at using missiles, so radar missiles, rather than illuminating all the way. They'd fire the thing up ballistically and then switch on the tracking radar at the last few seconds to actually control the intercept. So they were very, very sophisticated and very clever. To an extent, that was mitigated because um, again, mentioning how the Iraq War carried on through between 1991 and 2003. In 2002, the Americans started a thing called Operation Southern Focus, where any firing against coalition aircraft would be responded to by some sort of attack on some part of their air defense system. So a lot of the air defense system was actually quite systematically taken down before the hostilities started in March 2003. But you're right. I mean, it was a very sophisticated network that had to be dealt with. Um,
So this, I guess, is quite a sea change in warfare at this point. And you've got a sophisticated ground-based air defense system, and then
mm.
you're going to be using a whole new range of weapons. How do you plan for that? Because you talk about this in your book, don't you? The sort of the planning stage before actually, delivering the operation.
Yeah, well, the planning was on the one stage. It was straightforward in that right from the end of 1991, the Americans had come up with a plan to invade Iraq should it be necessary. So when George W. decided that that's what they're going to do, it was a matter of just taking the plan and dusting it off and just refining it. Um, but the thing was that it depended on a couple of things. Firstly, in 1991, there had been a massive coalition and there was a massive number of troops there. But this was going to be a much, much smaller operation. So the ground commander was very keen that it should very heavily rely on surprise. On the other hand, the Gulf War of 1991 had started with about a week or 2 weeks worth of sustained air bombardment. And obviously, the Air Force was very keen to do it the same way because that worked last time. So there are these two very differing views on how it should be done. And to an extent, the compromise was that there would be this sort of soft start, if you like, the southern focus before the actual official the combat started. That for some months before that, aircraft would start taking down bits of the air defense system. So that would be so on day one they'd be fighting against a degraded system, and again, given the defense suppression aids and the rest of it, and given things like stealth aircraft, which could actually fly in over Baghdad and places like that. Because the other thing I should mention is that with all this, there was what they call the super missile engagement zone around Baghdad, with lots and lots of these mobile missiles, as I've described, which really covered the whole of the airspace there. So you really didn't want to go in there unless you were in a stealth airplane that nobody could see on a radar. So yeah, so the planning had to be sort of very, very, very tight, really, because instead of having a whole 2 weeks or 3 weeks worth of bombardment before, the Air Force was, in fact, the Army Command was very keen that both campaigns should start exactly at the same time. So it was trying to sort of take down the Iraqi air defense system at the same time, not giving the game away that the guys are about to leg it over the border from Kuwait and invade. Um, so yeah, quite detailed planning went into all that.
Yeah. So is this where the phrase shock and awe comes from?
Well, that was a shock and awe, yeah, because when Gulf War One had started, there were all these wonderful pictures from CNN of bombs going off and big explosions and fireworks and everything else. And so the great expectation was that the same thing was going to happen again, because yeah, that's what the journalists wanted to see. Of course, they were all in downtown Baghdad. The deadline had already been given to Saddam to get out of the country within 48 hours, or things would start happening. And so everybody's there waiting for the fireworks to begin, but they didn't. And that's partly, well, mainly because of using precision weapons. Because instead of just dropping bombs indiscriminately from day one, they were very, very finely targeted at exactly the right, the command hubs and things like that, which quite often were deep underground bunkers. So bunker buster bombs would be dropped, which would then drop down through the concrete and then go banag sort of underneath where you couldn't hear it. And all these things also that were quite often in compounds behind big walls. So it all happened, but of course you didn't hear it or see it because it was all happening underground or behind high walls. So I'm afraid the journalists were very, very disappointed with that one. And I remember people saying, "Oh, it's a bit of a damp squib. Nothing much is happening." Well, actually, a lot was happening, and you just couldn't see it.
But unless you're Iraqi, there was probably quite
Unless,
a bit
yeah,
happening
that's probably a
in
bit
that
too late by
situation.
then. Yeah, yes,
So,
yeah,
can you give me a sort of sense of like the order of battle? What kind of aircraft were used? Because you mentioned is it the F-117, the
yeah.
Nighthawk was first, but obviously they weren't the only aircraft by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I mean there was a whole panoply of aircraft really, in terms of the attack aircraft, as you say, the F-117s. Um, the US Air Force had the F-15 Strike Eagles there, and they also had lots of and numerous F-16s, which were also being used for suppression of air defences as well as actually bombing things. The US Navy was there. I think there were 5 carriers there. F-18s were really the most numerous aircraft there. F-18s also used by the Royal Australian Air Force, the squadron there of theirs. lots of electronic warfare aircraft, A6 or EA6 prowlers there. Um, and then stuff like gunships. In fact, there are lots of very sort of different wacky parts of Hercules aircraft, both from the AC-130 gunships through to other aircraft which were designed to support special forces, including refueling helicopters. God knows what. So lots of helicopters around. Chinooks, MH-53s, lots. The Marine Corps were there with Harriers, as were the RAF. So RAF Harriers were involved both based in Kuwait and also across in Jordan. Jordan also A-10s and A-10s also in Kuwait as well. So lots and lots of A-10s around. So huge numbers of aircraft there doing those. The USAF quite a long time ago had given up on tactical reconnaissance for some reason I didn't quite understand, but so they're short on reconnaissance assets. So they use satellites a lot, but in terms of tactical reconnaissance, both the Tornado using the Raptor pod, the RAF also used Canberras, photo reconnaissance Canberras, ancient machines, but very, very good camera cover. The US Navy had F-14s with TARPS pods, which were used as well. The sort of old panoply of backup aircraft doing reconnaissance, and probably the most important things of all, tanker aircraft, which were needed really to support the whole operation. So KC-10s, KC-135s, and the RAF also provided TriStars and VC-10 tankers. VC-10s are particularly, well, both of those were very important for the US Navy because they use the same probe and drogue system that the US Navy and the RF use, whereas the USAF use a boom and receptacle method, which is completely different. And the two aircraft I haven't mentioned, which are kind of big surprises in a way, the B-52 and the B-1, which both designed as strategic bombers, but both ended up being used really for almost for close air support type work, at which they were very, very good because armed with really good targeting pods, they could stay up for hours on end and carried loads of bombs. So were kind of very, very useful to have on station for a long time. Which then leads on to the next thing of things that could stay on for a long time. Lots of drones. So that was the beginning really of using drones, which either could drop weapons or could just be used for as reconnaissance assets. And in case there were occasions where they were using for target marking, they would have a laser pod to fire for aircraft to drop laser bombs on. So as I say, there was a massive panoply of aircraft, a massive aircraft fleet really, of all sorts of different aircraft doing different things and covering up pretty much every single role that you can think of. And I've probably missed a few out as well. In fact, I know I have. I've missed all the stuff that was operating out in the Persian Gulf.
So obviously, then most of these aircraft, I assume, are flying are armed with precision weapons at this time, or is
Yeah,
you talked about? I think you said 8% in the first Gulf War.
yeah, 68% in the Iraq War. So again, the vast majority of weapons dropped during the Iraq War of 2003 were precision weapons, which is, I guess, why we look upon it as the time when precision warfare came into its own. Really,
what were they? Because they weren't all laser guided bombs, were they? What were these weapon systems?
Well, most of them were actually, but I say laser guided or with the GPS backup. So whether they were dropped using GPS or laser, but again, that gave the opportunity particularly for close support of troops, to be able to drop accurate in the knowledge that you weren't going to take out your own guys. Through bombs falling short, through missing or things like that. Some of the and the name of it, just the Maverick missiles, which are used both by A-10s and also RAF Harriers, and those are optically guided, basically, either with an IR or a TV head on them. So that was another weapon, and again GPS guided, I think, or inertial guided some of the standoff missiles, which were used as well. So.
Were there air launched cruise missiles or any?
Yes, certainly air launched cruise missiles, and actually Tomahawks launched from some submarines as well. So I guess those count too, I suppose, don't they? So yeah, all those sort of weapons as well. Yes, indeed.
So how did this change tactics and planning? Because I mean, I was reading a couple on your book, and it said the whole campaign was 3 weeks long, which is a tiny amount of time, really, when you consider what's. I mean, we are talking about the initial invasion period here. To be
yes, yeah.
3 weeks is not very long, is it?
Not very long at all. But I mean, that was the sort of whole concept really was this surprise attack from the ground, which firstly was was going to go in when nobody was expecting it, but also would then move very fast and wouldn't actually hang around and fight head on to places that would actually would skirt around things if need be, just lock the Iraqi forces in position, but then go past them to make that dash to Baghdad on the grounds that if you made it into Baghdad, you then take out take out Saddam and his team, and then once they go, the whole thing falls apart. So that was the concept, which worked very well. One of the things was though that having planned the air side of it, and again I've told one of the RAF Harrier guys was saying that they planned what they were going to do on their mission on day one, and because it actually fell sort of outside, or is it outside Kuwait? It was inside Iraq, but within the no-fly zone. They did a dress rehearsal just to see how it all work out. I thought, well, that works then. Maybe a week before, but when the day came, everything had moved so quickly that actually that target was suddenly miles behind our own line, so it became completely irrelevant. So that mission they planned and practiced became superfluous, and they were looking further beyond that.
Mm.
And that's I guess where we moved into close air support and how that worked, in terms of the difference between the way the US Army operated, and that was going up sort of on the left hand side, the sort of eastern side of the Tigris Euphrates, and then up, and then the US Marine Corps, which kind of went up on the eastern side of the Euphrates, had a different way of doing business, um, which was a better way for aircraft to operate in close support of the troops, whereas the US and Army one was rather more difficult.
Mm. So the Marine Corps have their own air wing, don't they?
Well, that's right. So the Marine Corps are based on charging ashore from a carrier or from an assault boat, and they don't, because they want to do that. They don't have a lot of artillery, but instead they've got airplanes. So they're very used to calling in air support, and so they have a very much dedicated at regimental level, a centre which will then coordinate air support. The US Army have got lots of artillery, and rocket launchers and God knows what else, and so they want to keep airplanes away. So they've got their own space, and there's a line, the Fire Support Coordination Line, FISCAL, which is in terms of the Marine Corps would be, I don't know, maybe 10 miles ahead of or perhaps not even that far, but ahead of where the frontline troops were. But even on the it's basically on the far side of the FISCAL, that's basically free play for airplanes to go off and do whatever they need to do. But on the near side, that it needs to be controlled, and so the US Marine Corps were very happy to have aircraft operating in that between their front line and the FISCAL, controlled, coordinated easily. The US Army, on the other hand, didn't really want that. They wanted complete control of everything on their side of the FISCAL. And because they were moving, they put the FISCAL 75 miles out from the frontline troops. So you can see there's quite a difference there. And also their airspace coordination was done back at divisional level. So again, a long way back. So again, it
What
became
was
a
the
very,
impact
very
of those two doctrines then in terms of how air power was used and how effective it was? Because, 75
yeah.
miles is a long way for artillery.
Well, it is, yeah, and so it wasn't particularly effectively used in the case of the U.S. Army, and indeed aircraft were quite often sent, were dispatched to, we'll go and hold in this area, and for on-call tasking if you needed, and quite often they would actually. They either couldn't get onto the frequency, or they just think, do you know what, we're better off going to see the Marines, where there was always a job for them to do for the Marines. So so aircraft would cycle in and out of the Marines, operating very effectively. Quite often airplanes would come back from missions ostensibly to support the US Army, and they hadn't dropped their weapons at all. They hadn't been used because there was no physical means of using them. So it was actually quite a big difference in the way things were put together from that perspective.
So were there things that, what we described there, I think, are scenarios that aren't ideal, but were there
Yeah.
things that actually went wrong and kind of just absolutely didn't go according to plan?
Well, yeah, the thing that springs to mind is actually I can't remember which regiment that it was now. There was an Apache regiment which decided to, and perhaps because of this business of the fast support coordination line being a long way away, but basically this regiment had a bit of a history in that during the first Gulf War, their commander had suddenly seen this opportunity to do a sort of long range strike against a Republican Guard regiment or unit, and they'd and this was sort of not really what the bread and butter was for the Apache, which is supposed to be there for close air support, and so the regiment came in with it, having had this sort of battle on a 12 years previously, and I think they thought they were going to do it again. And so they tried to do it again, but again, but they had the terrain was different. And what they hadn't spotted was that the desert they were going to fly over wasn't actually desert at all. It was actually quite well cultivated, and there were quite a lot of people growing there, and there were big power lines across it and all the rest of it. And so they also chose a day that wasn't particularly good weather in terms of their takeoff and landing base. And so I think they lost a couple of aircraft just in the takeoff phase. And then, of course, as they went over, they had to pull up over power lines. Their presence was reported by people who lived under the route, and so they were quite heavily shot up. And didn't really achieve didn't achieve anything they were supposed to have done. So it was a complete disaster, really. They tried again a few days later, doing it slightly differently, or rather more successful. But that was, I think, a good illustration of, in 1991, that had been a sort of an innovative idea, an innovative tactic that nobody had thought of. In 2003, it was trying to make a pre-plan fit to something that it didn't quite, trying to smash a sort of round hole or a round peg into a square hole type thing.
Wasn't
So
it
that
akin
is,
to what the Americans call a thunder run? I seem to remember
that
reading.
was yeah, that was right at when they got as far as Baghdad. That was the send the armor into the middle of Baghdad to show that they could do it, and again supported by A-10s, which again that worked very well, in fact, and they were able to sort of project the power. And again, that's where aircraft were very good at supporting the ground troops as they went in, taking out things as they went, um, going in going in quite low and making their presence felt, which also, because quite often in an aeroplane you don't need to shoot at anybody. You just need to show that you're there, and people will run away. So yeah, that was an occasion where it did work very well. Actually, I think they did a couple of thunder runs into the middle of Baghdad um, to seize the ground.
And the
Um,
RAF's role in all of this. Didn't the RAF get some specialist duties?
Yeah, they did. I mean, apart from sort of long range interdiction, which the Tornado was very good at, and the reconnaissance role that I've mentioned, they're also involved because I mean, on the one hand, there was the campaign, the invasion from Iraq that ran up through Baghdad, but on the other hand, on the other side, coming in from Jordan and from the sort of the western reaches of Saudi Arabia were special forces, and they'd gone in to take out the so-called weapons of mass destruction. Remember the sort of all the fuss that was made of the Scud missiles during
Yeah.
the first Gulf War, and it was thought that these things would be used again. And so there'd been a lot of training beforehand, actually, of specifically one of the Harrier squadrons went out to the States to work with special forces to work out the tactics they were going to use. So the special forces infiltrated in small groups with air support behind them, which both was there to offer fire support if they needed it, but also reconnaissance support as well to go in and help find these missiles and find where they might be parked. And help the special forces teams and get rid of them, neutralize them before they could be used. So there was quite a sort of intensive campaign that was being carried on almost cloak and dagger, so sort of away from the limelight, while the other campaign was going on in the east.
Was that
So
successful?
yeah, well, apparently it was. Not
Because we don't know about it.
well, 'cause,
Yeah.
I think somebody said at the time because the Iraqis didn't use their weapons, and whether it's they didn't have any, or whether it's because they suddenly realised, well, they obviously, I mean, they did have some because people found some of the particularly Scuds and modified Scuds at the end of the war, but they didn't use them because the area was denied to them. So from that perspective, it was very, very successful. Um,
But is there any sort of sense of what impact this had on the Iraqi military, sort of psychologically speaking? I mean, I know we're using the phrase "the shock and awe" as more of a
yeah,
TV thing, but I think shock, if you're going to get if element of
yeah.
surprise, then you are trying to achieve shock, aren't you?
Yeah, well, it did because particularly, in fact, at one stage during the war for about sort of 3 or 4 days, there was quite a heavy sandstorm at Shamal, and the Iraqi forces couldn't understand how they were being still targeted when they couldn't see in front of them, and that was because of this business of having a sort of GPS backup. And also, I mean, what the other aircraft that I didn't mention were things like rivet joint and aircraft like that, which could which could spot um, uh, ground troops, so that they could be ground troops could be detected by radar from aircraft sort of back over the Saudi border, and then given where those targets are, you could then send something like a B1 or B-52 in and take out those targets very successfully. So yeah, I think it was terrifying for the Iraqi troops because there was no hiding.
Mm.
Wherever they were, they'd be taken out. And even I think the Republican Guard were very well trained and very well disciplined. So they would park the vehicle somewhere and put the troops somewhere else. But of course, they come back and discover that the vehicles weren't there anymore because they'd been taken out. So yeah, I think it was quite well very dispiriting for the Iraqi troops to realise that this precision warfare was actually precisely targeted on them.
Mm.
Um,
So we've gone from 8%, and I think you said 68%.
68, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah, which is
yeah,
a huge difference, of course.
yeah.
What impact do you think this had upon other countries looking on, shall we say? So, our well, former adversaries at the time from the Cold War. What was, did this have an impact upon other people's
Well,
military countries'
I
military?
think it must have done because I mean, even disregarding what I said about the limitations in terms of clear air mass, in terms of having to have air supremacy, air superiority, what was demonstrated was an amazing ability to be very precise, to be able to find, to locate targets wherever they were, and then to hit them very accurately and sort of very economically. Again, a laser guided bomb is an expensive weapon, but it's probably less expensive than dropping eight or 8,000 pound bombs or whatever else. So in terms of the actual rate of usage of weapons, it was you've got a force now which is very economic in its expenditure of weapons, which is very accurate in terms of where it puts them, and that's actually a really powerful message that you're sending there. Um, uh, and again, the weapon I didn't specifically mention, but Storm Shadow, which was the standoff missile, which the tornadoes used. Again, a long range and very accurately could take out command bunkers and things like that, which it had done from quite a distance away. And again, that has got a standoff capability, so you don't need to go wading in through all the defences. You can quite happily sit on your side of the border and fire them off. So
Mm.
again, demonstrating that capability. And the same with air launched cruise missiles, um, does show that an incredibly strong capability, which if you were up against it, I think you'd sit up and take notice of it.
Mm. So, what impact did it have in terms of technology and how precision weapons continued to develop? I
Yeah.
guess prior to the Ukraine war, because I think we're into a slightly different
Yeah,
area.
we are.
I think.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that it did was it made precision weapons smaller,
Right.
because if you're, I mean, the standard bomb, let's say for the RAF was 1,000 pound bomb. Now that when it goes bang is a very big bang, and it creates a lot of damage, um, which is great if you're dropping it because you might miss it if because it's unguided. But if it's guided, do you need that much explosive? Well, you don't really. You can be much more precise. And of course, the other thing is that if you take out a target, particularly in the environment with sort of post Iraq war and over in Afghanistan, where you're taking out targets of insurgents and you don't want to damage the local population, or you don't want to take out the local mosque when you're taking down the next door house, um, then you want to drop a much smaller bomb much more accurately. And so we won't go down to a 500 pound bomb, or much smaller, rather than going up in bomb size.
Mm.
So that's probably the main thing really. Taking down small precision bombs that that don't cause so much collateral damage. Um,
So, like a Hellfire being launched from a Reaper, I guess, when you're trying to hit a compound.
well, that's right, yes, and where you can take out perhaps a single person with. In fact, again, I've heard stories of Afghanistan with I'm trying to remember the name of the weapon. It just escaped my senile mind, but it was basically the RAF version of it's brimstone, of firing a brimstone at two people walking down a road and vaporizing one, and the other guy would just stand there wondering what would happen to his mate. You could be
Oh,
that accurate, or that precise, and cause damage to and the
yeah.
damage to be restricted in that way. So yeah, the precision brought with it less in the way of collateral damage, which
Mm.
again, if in terms of hearts and minds, is a really important thing. If you're then going to sort of move into a country and, or you're trying to subdue it and keep the locals on side.
So I'm
But
guessing from what we see a lot in the papers these days, a lot of that capability we don't have. I'm talking about the UK
mm.
specifically here. A lot of that capability has been lost. Is it fair to say,
Well,
or is a lot less of it?
I think there's a lot less of it simply because we've got much less aircraft than we had even back then. So we've got fewer aircraft, and a lot fewer weapons. Um, Bearing in mind that a lot of them have been used up over Iraq and Syria. Um, but we still have those weapons. I mean, Typhoon still flies with them, as does F-35. So we still have that. We do still have that capability. We have fewer aircraft and fewer weapons. But again, the argument goes that, well, if you're going to be precise, you don't need that many. You don't need to send 1,000 bombers over Cologne if you just want to take out the power station. You can do it with one airplane these days,
Mm,
and so that's the difference, I suppose. That if you can be precise, you can get away with fewer numbers.
mm.
Um,
I know we're moving on to here from the Iraq War, but I think we probably do need to talk a little bit about
yeah,
Ukraine. And
yeah.
do you think that drones are making aircraft or that type of warfare obsolete?
It's really difficult to say. I mean, partly because we don't know the full picture, and we can't know it because it's being kept to itself. But what we've got in Ukraine is very much a static war. It's like World War One, and so if we were to compare World War One static warfare with, let's say, World War Two Western Desert Campaign, highly mobile, they're two completely different things. So what might work for one may not necessarily work for the other. And I think there's danger that we always have, um, and particularly the British Armed Forces always have, is always being ready to fight the war that we just had.
Yeah.
And so, of course, the next one comes, it's different, and suddenly we've got all the wrong kit and the wrong tactics and everything else. And to an extent, perhaps we saw that in the first Gulf War when we went in with Cold War tactics, which weren't perhaps necessarily relevant to a very different sort of theatre out in Iraq. So, yeah, I mean, certainly drones have their place, and again, one might say, in terms of close air support and all that kind of stuff, but how far they go on the other side, do we have a mix of drones and manned aircraft? And I don't think we'll ever lose the manned aircraft because you kind of need, however intelligent artificial intelligence is. I think at the moment, and certainly for the foreseeable future, it can't compete with a man. And particularly, we're very good humans at innovating. I mean, a bit like the Apache squadron in Gulf War One, seeing an opportunity to think out of the box and score a great victory. So it's that ability to kind of not necessarily think in logical ways, but think outside the box and come up with solutions. So yeah, I mean, drones have their place, and drones I think always probably will have. Whether little ones taking out a single man, whether they're the sort of small airliner size one that fly around for 3 or 4 days. Hoovering up information or dropping bombs or whatever, they have their place. But I think it's within a hierarchy of air machines, which includes piloted ones as well.
Mm.
So yeah, I don't think pilots can be out of a job soon.
Well, let's not get onto AI because that's just going to be a whole nother can of worms, isn't
Yeah,
it? Got a couple
yeah,
of comments here. Peter
yeah.
says, "Good evening, Mike. Pete from
Hello,
14
Pete.
Squadron."
Hello, Pete. Yeah. Oh,
So,
sorry,
what?
Ron.
Tell me about 14 Squadron. How do you know Pete?
I'm not sure which Pete that is, but
It's Peter Day.
oh right, Peter Day. Yes, he was on 14 Squadron before I was actually. He was on it in the days of Jaguar. I Tornado came after that, but they're
Yeah.
basically doing the same job. Yeah, well, 14 Squadron I served on twice actually, and it had a long and distinguished history, mainly out in the Middle East, up to 1945 when it's all out in Germany. And when Peter and I both were on it at different times, we were based at Bruggen, which is West Germany. It's sort of on the border with the Netherlands, just to the west of Dusseldorf. And there, the roles were nuclear strike and low level ground attack, low level interdiction, basically.
Mm.
Tornado was the main task in terms of conventional warfare was taking out the Warsaw Pact airfields and their strategic SAM sites, um, which is what we did.
Yeah. Graham says during Op Granby,
Yeah,
we installed ASMA, that might mean something to you,
yeah,
into various Middle East air bases. It was networked across the bases using fiber optics. It was assumed that if a fiber cable was hit by a bomb, it would shatter along its length, potentially for miles. Hence, miles of spare fiber was supplied for battle damage repair. Did attacks on
yeah.
Iraqi network infrastructure result in this type of damage, or had we overestimated the potential effects of bombs on fiber? That's it.
That is a very interesting question, and the answer straight answer is I don't know. But the other thing is that all the they wouldn't have had time to do it with connecting up the machines, but the
What are
Iraqi
they?
stuff.
Sorry, what put the asthma
That
machine like, please.
It was a means of transmitting in the days before emails became a big thing of transmitting data across from stations to stations. So targeting information, air tasking message, that kind of stuff would all be transmitted in that manner. But the Iraqi stuff was all buried. So it was all underground cabling. So again, you had to be quite accurate about where you hit it. And um, they chose the repeater nodes. So the information would come in, would then have to be repeated and sent down the next cable. So it was retransmitted to so that the signal strength wasn't lost on its way down. And so the targets were these repeater stations, but they were all under kind of really quite small. They had to be accessible, obviously, but almost like manhole covers. So they were tiny targets, had to be struck very accurately. And whether those things cut the cables in that way, or whether they just took out the repeaters, so the signal strength was lost, I honestly don't know. And the mode of failure, I don't know either. And again, one wonders if they were buried, quite how robust they would be, and whether that would make a difference as well. So,
Mm. So I'm quite surprised actually to hear that the Iraqis were using that kind of innovation,
oh
really.
yeah, I mean, one of the things that again we do, and I say we, the West, do, and if you look back at particularly, well, if you look at even the fighting against the Japanese at the beginning of World War II, but if you look into certainly Korea, and if you look into Vietnam, it's a kind of I'd say racist opinion that people who aren't white faced with round eyes are a bit thick. But actually, there are some very clever people in Iraq and indeed in Iran at the moment um, who really did think things. And part of it, of course, is that we used to train these guys. Most of the Iraqi army officer corps had been trained in the West.
Mm.
Sandhurst and places like that. These were it had been the whole Iraqi model was very much a sort of British one. I'm sure they sent their guys to other places as well. So very well trained, very well motivated officer corps, and and very clever technicians who thought all this stuff out. So I think we dismiss them at our peril, really.
So it's very easy. Yeah, you sort of see that quite a lot actually in terms of underestimating the enemy, don't you? But also
Yeah,
not understanding them culturally, that they are capable
yeah, yeah,
of innovation and
yeah,
fighting in ways that we don't expect necessarily.
yeah.
Don't
I
play
mean,
by
so
our rules.
yeah, I mean, going back to Korea, that was one of the things that the interdiction campaign they go and take out a railway bridge, and then a day later it had been rebuilt. How do they do that? Well, they had ways and means, and or there's another one where they took the bridge out, so they just built a railway track round the valley. Using whatever means were there to do it, and these people being dismissed as well. They don't know very much. We'll bomb them, and that will frighten them off. But it didn't. And the same is true in Vietnam. And particularly talk about gooks and that kind of stuff. The Viet Cong. But when you think about it, they did what they wanted to do, and at the end of the day, they won.
Mm.
So it's foolish to underestimate and to disrespect your enemy. Really, you kind of have to respect them and realize that they're going to be clever. I think that's the danger at the moment. Again, we're flicking backwards between wars, but if you look at Ukraine now, we look at the Russians and go, yeah, hopeless, useless, not very good. However, if we were to underestimate them, that'd be a massively dangerous thing to do because
Mm.
they will be up to hurt us one
You know,
way or another.
as you know, I'm reading a book about the drone war in
Yes,
Ukraine
yeah,
because we've got a guest coming up. And one of the things he says from the sort of get-go is that there are two world experts in drone warfare. One is the Ukraine, and we're aligned with the West, and we are happy to share what we have
yeah,
learned. And the other, of course, is Russia. Where do you think they'll be sharing what they've learned?
yes, yeah, yeah.
Because they're no mugs, are they?
No, they're not at all. And again, yes, we all laugh at them screwing things up, and they have screwed up very badly in Ukraine, but equally well, they're still there, and they are learning. And again, going back to World War Two, they got stuffed at the beginning with the when the Germans invaded with Operation Barbarossa, but they fought their way back very very effectively, and they won in the end. So yeah, we'd be very foolish to underestimate them.
Indeed. What are you working on at the moment, Mike? What's next?
The Gloucester Javelin is my next little
Well,
project.
that's quite a change from
It
high-tech
is very
guided
change, actually.
munitions.
Yeah, it's stepping back into the 1950s. But it's a great. I mean, it's this delta wing machine which people deride. Actually, it does have a bad reputation. In fact, well, Peter Day flew them as well. So there you go. There's another link with what we've just been talking about. But yeah, it was and I did do a book 10 years ago on the subject. Which is why I'm a bit of a crusader on its behalf, really, because I think it's a very misunderstood machine, and certainly did have its failings and its drawbacks, probably not helped by the politics during the design phase. Um, but it was an airplane that did an awful lot of the pioneering work for tactical aircraft, for fighter command, in terms of air-to-air fueling, in terms of tactics for radars, in terms of tactics for missiles, all that stuff. It was hugely involved in the crisis in Cyprus, down in Rhodesia, out in Singapore, and the confrontation with Indonesia, and it was a very capable machine. The interesting that people get very excited about the Lightning and say, "What a wonderful machine!" I have done a book on that as well, but sorry, but yeah, the Lightning had two guns and two missiles, but the Javelin had four guns and four missiles. So in terms of exercises, the guys who come back from the Lightning say, "Yeah, we got how many kills," and the Javelins who come back say, "We've got twice as many as that." So it's all things are relative. But yeah, it's a fascinating machine. It's fascinating aerodynamically and structurally and all that. Fascinating politically, and fascinating operationally as well. A great machine. So I'm grateful for this opportunity that I'm now having to to set the record straight as I see it, and sell the Javelin in the 21st century.
Well, I know you're obviously joking, but there is always things to be learned from past mistakes, isn't there? And how
Oh,
things didn't quite pan out the way we expected.
yeah, always, always, and I think that is the massively important part of history, really. To actually look at it and learn the lessons, and that's what actually we are really bad at doing. But it's why it's important to remember history, to record history, and then to be able to interpret it. But try and interpret it with an open mind, if you know what I mean. I think quite a lot of history is very revisionist, and we try and sort of there's a set agenda. You've got to try and make the history fit it. I mean, that's a very sort of Russian thing to do. But yeah, to actually look at it and genuinely learn what went wrong and what went right, both things being equally important in my view.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
100%. Pete says, "Great Crusader drop."
yeah, well, 14 Squadron were the Crusaders, by the way.
Okay, so I'm just going to not sit here nodding
Yes.
politely like I know what you're all talking about.
No, that's
Uh,
right. 14 Squadron actually famously they're called the Crusaders because their badge was because they fought the First World War in the Middle East, in Palestine, and they adopted this Crusaders shield as the squadron badge. And it's always been known as the Crusaders till the year before last, when somebody said it wasn't politically correct and they had to change it. Would you believe
Times
it?
change, don't
Oh, they
they?
do. Yes,
Times
that's
change.
right. Yeah, yeah.
I've got a comment from Grant saying, "Thanks, Mike. It was a thoroughly interesting talk." And he's ex-RAF as
Oh,
well.
that's a relief that somebody found it interesting anyway. Always
Um,
encouraging to know. Yeah,
so I'd love to have you back on. So we'll talk
oh,
after this, and
yeah,
you've written quite a number of books, which I think people will be interested in. So we'll
yeah.
definitely talk again.
Well, as you probably think, I'm delighted to talk about these things. So yeah, very pleased to come back and talk.
Brilliant. And so that just leaves me to say thank you so much, Mike. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, it's been a real pleasure from this end as well. So thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to talk.
Perfect. I'll see you again soon.
Okay, thanks indeed.